lot of people about the importance of brand. Everyone recognises the value of brand as a key point of difference. Think Coke, Nike, Apple. But it turns out the interpretation of brand itself and the application to this industry is still very subjective.
I think brand is a very important issue, and it's certainly an issue I think which is important to the industry funds as well. Brand should really represent the value, but your value has to be important to the members, so value has to be just that, it actually has to offer something that actually means something.
I don't think it's very important to the membership at all what the brand is.
Coming of choice and us putting effort into building brand and advertising ourselves has been really positive.
Welcome to the second plenary session for CMSF 2007, Brand, Marketing and Workplace Distribution in a Complex and Competitive World. I invite our first presenter, Mark Ritson, to share his expertise in this area and to challenge our thinking on brand, marketing in achieving super success.
Delighted to be here. My topic is building brand in superannuation, the what, the whys and the hows. And we'll look at all three of these topics in this particular order. So let's do the what first before we look at some of the hows. So what is brand and what do we mean by it? As we've seen from the interviews there, we've got a range of different definitions. I define brand very simply, and I do it really from a customer point of view. To understand what we mean by brand, you have to create a continuum. And it's a continuum between the two extremes that operate in any industry. At one end of the continuum, we have brands. And at the other end, we have the opposite of brands, commodities. Anything can be a commodity. Hotels, microphones, computers, TV screens, and especially, as we see at the moment, superannuation funds. Commodities are products that do something for us for a price. Brands bring something extra to the table. They stand for things, they represent things, and they mean things to their consumers and their owners. The dirty secret of all brands is they begin life as commodities. The classic and perhaps most famous technique to turn commodities into brands is to talk about their meanings through the medium of advertising. Here is one of my favourite examples of the act of branding through advertising, because it illustrates everything we're talking about. First, you see no mention of price, which is a commodifying factor. Second, in this very typical perfume ad for Calvin Klein, you see a very small reference to the actual product itself. It occupies no more than about 2% of that print ad in the bottom left-hand corner. And the rest of this ad, the remaining 98% of the ad, is devoted to what Calvin Klein wants you to think that escape stands for, which in this case is sex between beautiful people in enclosed spaces. The point is, this is branding. We talk about what we stand for. Now, that doesn't mean we have to use advertising. Whenever we step outside the commodity trap of just talking about performance, of just talking about price, and begin to talk about what we stand for, not by using the B word, but by talking about what we as a fund represent to our customers, we build our brand. We can send a brand back from whence it came. We can debrand it, weaken it, commodify it, by beginning to emphasize the commodity and underemphasize the thing that the brand stands for. The quickest and fastest way of doing this is by emphasizing price. This is the same brand, except it's not a brand now, it's just a product. This is again Calvin Klein Escape, but this is an internet voucher from a perfume retailer. And suddenly all the magic, all the sex between beautiful people has disappeared. And now we are confronted with the commodity version of this brand, smelly alcohol for low prices. When you put lots of brands together in the same place, you commodify all of them. Brands are special, each one is unique. And at an event like this, it's highly appropriate to talk about superannuation funds in general. But out in the marketplace, it's very important. It's vital to speak of each brand as it being a unique entity, because that's really what it should be. This very simple equation explains everything you need to know about brand. Take any brand and subtract from it the commodity equivalent, and whatever's left over, if there's anything left over at all in the consumer's mind, is the concept we call brand equity. And this is the focus for most 21st century management activities. You need to have brand equity. And the questions that should occupy you as you look at this equation is, first of all, if I really did this, if I went out and found out from my customers and my employees, do I have anything over and above simply being a superannuation fund? The question that you face today is, what do you have over and above the commodity? What do you stand for and what do you represent? And are you working towards it? Everything in branding is aimed at that. Not at brochures, not at advertising, not at communication, and not at logos. These are a means to the end. And the end is, what do we have? Do we have some brand equity, some value? Let's move to the whys, and let's talk about why brand equity is so important to superannuation. It gets mentioned all the time, but there's a great degree of confusion about why brand is so important at this stage in the evolution of the fund industry. Let me give you 5 advantages. The first is particularly important. Differentiation. In the world of choice we now live in, being different from everyone else is clearly a key factor. Something that we don't talk about as much, though, is that there are different kinds of differentiation, and some of them are better than others. Let me take the airline industry to illustrate my point. I think Jetstar is basically differentiated on the basis of price. Price-based differentiation is easy. It's easy to communicate. It's easy to achieve. But there are 2 big downsides. First, it's very easy for someone else to beat you. If your only source of differentiation is price, then clearly someone is going to come along and be more cheap than you. And very quickly, your source of differentiation will be lost. The second advantage of price is disadvantage of price is equally negative. Your margins are shrunk. They're tiny because of your price-based approach. I would argue that Virgin Blue is a slightly more secure offering. Virgin Blue is starting to build brand equity, but for the most part, Virgin Blue's differentiation right now is based upon superior product. It has product-based differentiation. Now, this is better than price-based. You get definitely better margins. But again, eventually, someone can and probably will come along with a superior product to you. Product differentiation is a good strength, and we shouldn't underestimate it. But again, it's not the most sustainable and long-term advantage. As a POM, I have to tell you that personally, British Airways is, just to me, and probably not to anyone else in the room, the best brand. I know it's not the cheapest. God knows I know it. It's not the best airline either. I know that as well. And yet, for the last 15 years, whenever I fly anywhere, I try my best to fly with BA. Why? Because I grew up with BA. Because it's my brand. British Airways is differentiated, to me at least, on brand. That's a much harder thing to achieve, but it's a much more secure place to be long term. Let's talk about our next advantage, which by building a strong brand results in loyalty and, most importantly, in customer retention. I'm sure most of you know this, but it's a myth that more customers, more investors, higher prices are the biggest drivers of profitability. That is in almost every case a total nonsense. The dirty secret of business is the single fastest and most reliable way to increase profitability is getting increased customers to stay with you longer or to buy more. And brand is a fantastic engine of driving this growth. There are different kinds of loyalty, just as there are different kinds of differentiation. Brand only plays a role in the top end of loyalty. A brand loyalist is driven not only by a good product, but by a belief, as we see with the BA example, in what the brand stands for. This kind of loyalty is stickier, it's more secure, it's likely to deliver a greater interest. But at the very top of the pyramid is not brand loyalists, but brand advocates. These are the ultimate. They are almost impossible to switch, and they will go out and market your product to others. And it is probably in many industries, including I would suspect superannuation, potentially the biggest single source of new customers, other customers recommending you. So, in loyalty there are lessons of different levels. And the key lesson is, brand drives the high end of the pyramid. And it would be a mistake to assume that just because you're not dissatisfied, you will stay loyal for a long period, particularly as competition and markets increase, and particularly as the costs of divorce begin to decrease. Our next one is a difficult one. Brand influences the perception of performance. There are objective measures of quality in every industry, JD Power, Choice, that list all the different products and all their objective quality performances. In your industry, most likely this is, of course, your return, as published in the newspapers and other magazines on an annual basis. These are objective measures of performance. But each and every customer must make a subjective evaluation of these objective measures. The point here is quality is always a subjective interpretation, and brand, or the lack thereof, plays an enormous role in influencing that subjective interpretation. It's quite a complex point. Let me illustrate with a story from my own life. The reason I have a terrible vocabulary filled with swear words is because I spent the first 10 years of my school days going to school with my father, who was a school teacher, in a Triumph Herald. Truly one of the most horrendous cars ever built by the British, and by God we built some. It was an horrendous car, and every day I began my school days next to my father in the passenger seat. I would jump in the car, ready to go to school. My father would jump in next to me. He would take the key from his key ring. He would place it into the Triumph's ignition. He would turn the key, and inevitably, the Triumph would do nothing. It would stall. At which point, my father would release a series of expletives that would make a sailor blush. Fucking, he would say. And my school day inevitably began with lots of expletives. And for this reason, I think I have today very bad language. The rest of the story, however, is what happened next. Finally, after 10 years, he saved up enough money to buy a second-hand Jaguar XJS, the famous, another unreliable British car. Again, the famous day came, and I jumped into the seat next to him to take my first ride to school in the new car, in the Jag. My father took out the key, placed it in the ignition, turned the key, and sure enough, the Jaguar did not start. At which point he turned to me and said, that's unusual. The product did the same thing. The response of the consumer was completely different. Why? Because he believed in the Jaguar brand. It influences the perception of performance. You're living in a world right now, thanks to, I'm sure, John Howard and Peter Costello, of fantastic economic performance. But as we all know, it's going to change at some point. When you're delivering double-digit returns on people's superannuation, they are not going to question the brand. But when the time comes, as it inevitably will, that you begin, through no fault of your own, to lose your customers' money, and they get a statement telling them that you have effectively done that, we will get to the Jaguar moment. And the moment will come where they'll say, my superannuation fund lost money this year. And then we get to the point. Is that because the industry and recession is upon us? Or is it because my superannuation fund is bad? This is the moment for brand equity, because brand equity has an enormous impact on the perception of performance. The word brand never comes up, but the concept of brand equity will always be there, or not, as the case may be. And finally, brand extension. Build a strong brand now, benefit for it for decades to come, because brand extension opens up whole new areas that you otherwise would have no right to go into. What do all these different brands have in common? J'adore, Virgin Blue, Nokia phones, Gucci sunglasses. The answer is twofold. One, they're all brand extensions. None of these businesses began life in these categories. Dior was a dressmaker, Virgin was a record label, Nokia was a forestry company, and Gucci leather goods. And second, they're now the most profitable and biggest contributions to the brands that they represent. The lesson is always the same. If you give it enough time, almost every company makes more money in areas of brand extension than in the original businesses that they went into. If we see this conference in 2057, the superannuation brands that are left will have diversified. And they will have diversified not because they offer good products, but because they have built brands which stand for something. And these brands open up bridges to other categories. And of course, this works both ways, because if you don't do it quick enough and fast enough, other brands from other industries will take one hard look at superannuation and say, I fancy a slice of this. How to brand? Let's look at two of the key challenges you face. The first is positioning, and the second is measurement. Positioning first, because it's probably the single biggest stumbling block to building a strong brand. What do we mean by positioning? We mean, what do we want to stand for in the mind of our members? We mean, what do we represent to them? What is that difference between us and the commodity? And it is becoming an increasingly difficult challenge in almost every major market for three key reasons. First, customers are increasingly time poor. They have less and less space in their brains to think about things. And as a result, the target you are aiming at in the shape of potential and existing members is shrinking. Second, there are more brands out there in almost every category than ever before, and each brand comes with a positioning statement. In your industry in particular, this is particularly relevant right now. Each brand is attempting to get their positioning across to a consumer that has less and less time to think about these things and is less and less interested. Finally, each of those brands is doing more communication than ever before in an even greater variety of channels as we've just seen from these wonderful awards. Put these three things together. Less and less space in the customer's brain, more and more brands, each with the positioning competing for that space, and each doing more and more communications, and you get the marketing phenomena known as clutter. And the point of clutter is very simple. It's not just that there's lots of stuff out there, it's that there's so much stuff out there we don't look at it anymore. The challenge of positioning is to find a way to get out of that mess, to build differentiation without necessarily spending a fortune. Let me share with you one of my favorite ever examples of a company getting this right. It's probably my favorite ever case of positioning. Quidel, which in the 1990s became the world's largest manufacturer of pregnancy tests. At the time, it only sold to hospitals and clinics. It was a business-to-business supplier, but it very much wanted to get involved in the over-the-counter pregnancy test market, the home pregnancy test market. They did some research, and they went out and talked to consumers about what they wanted from a pregnancy test. And like any good company, they then divided that research and those customers into segments. And in the case of Quidel, there were only 2 segments for pregnancy tests. The first market was fearfuls, possibly pregnant women, average age 16 to 42, whose income ranges from unemployed to $100,000 a year. They do not want to become pregnant and are hoping for a negative result. They're extremely nervous about the test, but view it as something they must endure in order to relieve their uncertainty, hopefully quell their fears. Literally 50% of the market. The other segment, hopefuls, possibly pregnant women, also aged 16 to 42. Income, unemployed, $100,000 a year. They are trying to become pregnant and are hoping for a positive result. They're extremely nervous about the test and its implications, but they see the test as something that may mark the start of a new phase in their lives. It's the classic story of segmentation. 2 completely identical groups demographically, but they couldn't be more different in what they want from the product. And the answer, and how they positioned the successful product, was, of course, to divide and conquer. Quidel created 2 completely different brands. For the hopefuls, the positioning said, the simplest, most trusted way of knowing when your family will grow or begin. For the fearfuls, a reliable source of peace of mind in 30 seconds. So, positioning. Talk to your target customers, define your brand on what their needs are, and if there are different needs out there, begin to think about using different brands. And keep the positioning tight. Because when you look at most companies, and frankly most super funds, and how they do their positioning, you glimpse an almighty secret. In my experience, having worked at positioning for about 10 years, there are 2 kinds of companies. The kinds that go through the motions when they define their brand, and the kinds that get it right. And the ones that go through the motions, without exception, have huge, deep, thick, complex positioning charts. They have 7 or 8 pages, triangles and squares, and 8 different things. And without exception, the brand and market leaders are tight and very quick. Less rather than more is the key. Something tight, something customers value, and something that will differentiate you from the crowd is the secret of good branding. Thank you.